Alexandra Hale grabbed the coffee cup off the tray without slowing her stride. Her heels clicking like gunshots across the marble lobby floor, and she walked straight into a man she never saw coming. Literally. The collision sent scalding coffee splashing across her $400 shoes, and without a single breath of hesitation, she turned on him like he'd done it on purpose. "You, get down there and clean that up." The man said nothing. He simply knelt. And every single person in that lobby watched a billionaire make a janitor out of a man who secretly owned half of everything she had ever called hers. Drop a comment with your city. Let me know how far this story has traveled, and don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning Silas Whitmore drove into the parking structure beneath Hale Dynamics, he already knew it was going to be one of those days where the world reminded you exactly where it thought you stood. He pulled the black Lincoln Continental into Bay 7, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment, with both hands resting on the wheel. The dashboard clock read 6:42. He had 18 minutes before his first scheduled pickup. He reached into the paper bag on the passenger seat, unwrapped a breakfast sandwich he'd made at home, egg cheddar, a little hot sauce, and ate it slowly, the way a man eats when he's learned not to waste anything, not even a quiet moment. He was 39 years old, but his hands looked older. There was a thin scar along the base of his left thumb from a machine press accident he'd survived at 24, and his knuckles carried the permanent slight darkness of a man who worked with engines and grease and metal on his days off. That morning, he'd been up before 5 to fix a neighbor's pickup truck. Mrs. Patterson, 71 years old, no family within 400 miles, and he hadn't had time to scrub his hands completely clean before pulling on his driver's uniform. There was still a faint smear of grease near his right wrist. He noticed it, rubbed it with his thumb, decided it wasn't worth the energy. He wasn't the kind of man who spent much time worrying about how he looked to other people. Silas finished his sandwich, folded the paper bag, neatly tucked it beside him, and checked his phone. One message from his daughter, Elena, sent at 6:15. "Dad, you forget to sign my field trip permission form again. It's on the counter. Love you." He smiled at that, the "love you" she always attached, like punctuation, casual, and certain, as if she'd never once considered that he might not already know it. He typed back, "I'll sign it before I pick you up. Love you more." He set the phone in the cup holder and got out of the car. The lobby of Hale Dynamics occupied the entire ground floor of a 40-story glass tower in downtown Chicago. Silas had been inside this building hundreds of times over the last year and a half. As a contract driver, had memorized every elevator bank, every security guard's first name, every subtle shift in the building's energy, depending on the time of day. Early morning was usually the quietest. The cleaning crew would be finishing up. The front desk staff would be arriving. The executives didn't typically roll in until after 8, sometimes closer to 9, depending on the day. Except for Alexandra Hale. Alexandra Hale arrived every morning between 6:50 and 7:10, depending on traffic, depending on mood, depending on a schedule that seemed to exist on a level of complexity most people couldn't track. She was 34 years old, the only child of the late Warren Hale, and she had taken over as CEO of Hale Dynamics 3 years ago following her father's death. She was smart. Nobody who worked with her doubted that. She was aggressive in negotiations, fearless in acquisition strategy, and she ran meetings the way some generals ran operations: fast, decisive, occasionally brutal. The company's revenue had grown under her leadership. Stock price was up. On paper, everything looked like a success story. But the people who'd been at Hale Dynamics long enough, the ones who remembered what the company felt like when Warren Hale was alive, they sometimes got quiet when Alexandra's name came up. Not hostile, just quiet. The kind of quiet that holds something it isn't sure how to say. Silas was crossing the lobby toward the elevator bank when he heard the main doors slide open behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. He was thinking about the permission slip, about whether Elena had eaten breakfast, about whether the school bus schedule had changed this week. He heard the sharp rhythmic click of heels on marble, moving fast, moving with purpose, and he stepped slightly to his right to give whoever it was more room on the wide-open floor. He wasn't quite far enough to the right. Watch. The impact was immediate and surprisingly forceful. Alexandra Hale was 5'7", and she walked like she weighed twice what she did, all forward momentum and controlled intention. She'd been holding the coffee cup, a to-go cup from the cafe on the corner of Michigan Avenue, one of 3 she typically consumed before 10 a.m. at chest level. And when her shoulder caught Silas's arm, the cup tilted, the lid popped, and a long splash of dark coffee arced directly down onto the front of her right shoe. There was a split second of absolute silence. The security guard at the front desk looked up. 2 women from the marketing department just arriving stopped moving. A maintenance worker near the far wall turned his head. Alexandra looked down at her shoe. It was a cream-colored leather pump, the kind of shoe that costs more than some people's car payments, and there was now a dark brown stain spreading across the toe and along the side seam. She stood perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked up at Silas. He was already looking at her. His expression was calm, not the forced calm of a man suppressing anger, not the stiff calm of someone frightened. Just genuinely, quietly calm. Like a man who had been through enough in his life that spilled coffee registered somewhere very far down the list of things that shook him. "You need to watch where you're going," Alexandra said. Her voice was sharp and even, not shouting. Worse than shouting, actually the flat, controlled tone of someone who is accustomed to being obeyed. "Do you see what just happened to my shoe?" "Yes, ma'am," Silas said. "I apologize. I should have moved further right." "That's a $200 shoe." He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't a lot a man could say to that kind of statement that wouldn't make things worse. "There's a cleaning cloth at the front desk," Alexandra said, and she said it the way someone tells a child where to find the paper towels. Not angry exactly, just completely certain that what would happen next was that this man would go get the cloth and come back and clean her shoe. Because that's what happened. That's how the world worked in her experience when she told someone in this lobby to do something. Silas looked at her for one moment. Just one. He didn't argue, didn't hesitate, didn't let his jaw tighten or his eyes harden. He simply turned, walked to the front desk, got the small white cloth the guard handed him with an expression that wasn't quite discomfort, but was close, and he came back and crouched down. He cleaned the coffee off her shoe. She stood there and let him do it. The 2 women from marketing had turned away by then, one of them pulling the other by the arm toward the elevator. The security guard had found something very interesting to look at on his computer screen. The maintenance worker had resumed his work. The lobby had collectively decided to be somewhere else in its attention, the way people do when they witness something they don't quite know how to categorize. Silas finished, straightened up, folded the cloth in his hand. "That should be all right now," he said. Alexandra looked down, inspected the shoe. Briefly looked back at him. She had not said thank you. She was already reaching into her bag for her phone, already moving toward the elevator bank, already somewhere else in her mind. "Next time," she said without looking at him, "pay attention to where you're going." She was in the elevator and gone before Silas had walked back to return the cloth. The security guard, his name was Darnell. Mid-40s, a man Silas had greeted by name every morning for 14 months, looked at Silas with something careful in his expression. "You okay?" Darnell asked quietly. "Yeah," Silas said. He handed back the cloth. "Good morning, Darnell." "Good morning, Silas." Darnell paused. "She didn't even—" "It's fine," Silas said. Not sharply, not with performance, just fact. He turned and walked back toward the parking structure, and his face held the same expression it had held throughout the entire exchange. Calm. Patient. Like a man who understood on a level most people never reach that dignity is not something another person can take from you. It has to be surrendered. And he hadn't surrendered it. He thought about Warren Hale on the drive home that evening. He thought about Warren a lot, actually. That wasn't unusual. Warren Hale had been his business partner, his closest friend for nearly a decade, and the person who had believed in him genuinely, practically with his own money and reputation, at a moment in Silas's life when almost nobody else did. He thought about the man at strange times, while waiting at red lights, while watching Elena do homework at the kitchen table, while lying in bed in that 40-minute window before sleep that was sometimes the quietest and most honest part of the day. He and Warren had met in 2008 when Silas was 22 and working as a junior systems engineer at a mid-size manufacturing firm outside of Indianapolis. Warren had been 46, already successful, already wealthy by most definitions, and he'd come in as a consultant to evaluate the firm's technical infrastructure. He'd sat in a room with a dozen engineers, and at the end of a 3-hour session, where most of them said what they thought Warren wanted to hear, Silas had raised his hand and told Warren plainly and with specific technical reasoning exactly why the proposed infrastructure upgrade was going to fail. The room had gone very quiet. Warren had looked at him for a long moment and said, "All right, tell me how you'd fix it." And Silas had. For 40 minutes without notes, without ego, without once suggesting that the senior engineers in the room were incompetent, only suggesting that there was a better way. Warren had listened to all of it. At the end he'd said, "Can you stay after this?" And that conversation, that accidental 40-minute conversation in a conference room in Indianapolis, had eventually become Hale Dynamics. They'd formalized their partnership in 2011. Silas had brought the technical architecture, the original algorithms that formed the company's core infrastructure management software, the systems that even now, 12 years later, were the backbone of everything Hale Dynamics built and sold. Warren had brought the capital, the connections, the business instincts, and the vision for where the industry was going. The equity split had been Warren's idea, not Silas's. 50-50. Warren had been absolute about it. "You don't work for me," he'd told Silas firmly the day they signed the papers. "We work together. Don't ever let me hear you say you work for me." Silas had never forgotten that. When Warren died, a sudden heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. Silas had been in Denver at a tech conference. He'd gotten the call from Warren's assistant at 7 in the morning and had driven straight to the airport and sat in a terminal chair for 4 hours because the next available flight wasn't for 4 hours, and he hadn't trusted himself to drive anywhere. He'd cried, which he almost never did, and he'd eaten a terrible airport cheeseburger because it was the only thing available, and his body was operating on autopilot, and he'd thought about the last conversation he and Warren had, which had been a 20-minute phone call 2 days earlier about a licensing deal, and he'd wished he had said something better than "talk soon" at the end of it. Kutsa. The transition period after Warren's death had been complicated. Alexandra had come in with authority, with legal standing, with the full support of the remaining board members. She'd restructured several departments, let a number of longtime employees go, and shifted the company's strategic priorities in directions that Silas had concerns about, concerns he'd raised through proper channels at board meetings in writing. He'd been heard technically. His objections had been noted in the minutes. But there was a difference between being heard and being listened to, and that difference had become clearer to Silas over the past 2 years. He had not made a scene about it. That wasn't his way. He had his equity. He had his board seat. He attended meetings. He voted. He made his position known and then let the process work. In the meantime, because he'd always been a man who needed to work with his hands as much as his mind, he'd taken the contract driving position. A friend of his ran a corporate transportation company that serviced several downtown firms, and they'd needed reliable drivers, and Silas had needed something to do with the hours between Elena's school drop-off and pickup that kept him moving, kept him useful, kept him from sitting at home thinking too much. It had not once occurred to him to tell his employer, the transportation company, that he was also a co-founder and 50% equity holder of one of their primary client companies. It simply hadn't seemed relevant. He showed up, he drove people where they needed to go, he was on time, and professional, and quiet. That was the job. He did the job. He had been assigned to drive Alexandra Hale approximately 6 weeks ago. She had not recognized him. He had not introduced himself. He found honestly that he was curious to observe, not in a cynical or vindictive way, but in the genuine way of someone who cares about something and wants to understand what's happening to it. He watched Alexandra. He listened to her phone calls when she didn't remember to lower her voice. He paid attention to the decisions she referenced in passing and compared them against what he knew about the company's actual technical needs. And what he observed had not reassured him. That evening, when he pulled into the driveway of his house, a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the northwest side. Nothing grand, a house with a porch that needed new boards, and a yard that needed work, and a warmth inside that had nothing to do with any of that. Elena was waiting for him at the kitchen table. She was 16, long-limbed and serious with her mother's eyes, and Silas privately believed her mother's intelligence, though her mother had been gone for 8 years now, and Elena had built herself largely on her own terms, which he admired more than he'd ever found the right words to say. She had the permission slip in front of her, a pen beside it. "Hey, Elle," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. "Hey, Dad." She watched him wash his hands at the sink. She had a habit of watching him when he first came home, assessing the way she'd done since she was small. He'd asked her about it once. She'd said, "I'm checking to see if you had a hard day." He'd told her she didn't need to do that. She'd said, "I know I don't need to. I want to." He hadn't argued with that. He dried his hands and picked up the pen and signed the permission slip. "There was something on the news about Hale Dynamics today," Elena said. He set the pen down and looked at her. "What kind of something?" "Something about a system issue. Some analyst said if they don't fix it soon, it could affect a major contract renewal." She paused. "Is that bad?" "It could be," he said carefully. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, you know something about it, don't you?" It wasn't quite a question. He sat down at the table across from her. He looked at his daughter, 16 years old, watching him with the patient, unhurried attention that she must have inherited from him, because he certainly hadn't taught it to her, and he thought about how much to say. "I know the system," he said finally. "I built it." She let that land. She'd known in the broad strokes that he had some kind of history with the company. He'd told her enough over the years to give her the outline without the weight of the details. But something in his voice tonight was different, closer to the surface. "And the people running it now," she said slowly. "Do they know you built it?" "Not exactly." She looked at him for a long time. "Dad," she said, "how long are you going to just let things go?" He reached over and picked up the permission slip, looked it over, set it back down. "I'm not letting things go," he said. "I'm being patient." "What's the difference?" He thought about Alexandra Hale that morning, the way she'd stood over him while he cleaned her shoe, the way she'd walked away without a word, the way Darnell had looked at him afterward with that careful, sorry expression. "The difference," Silas said quietly, "is that patience is a choice. Letting go is giving up." Elena looked at him for another long moment. Then she got up and started pulling things out of the refrigerator for dinner, moving with the easy efficiency of a girl who'd been taking care of half the household since she was 12. She didn't say anything else. But before she turned back to the stove, she glanced at him once over her shoulder, and in that glance was something he recognized, not worry exactly, but the particular alertness of someone who senses that things are about to change, the way the air changes before a storm that hasn't announced itself yet. Silas sat at the table and listened to his daughter cook. He thought about Warren. He thought about the system error he'd seen referenced in 3 different internal memos over the past month. Memos he had access to as a board member. Memos that had made him increasingly quietly certain that the technical team was chasing the wrong problem. He thought about the contract renewal. He thought about 470 employees whose livelihoods were anchored to a company that was quietly leaning toward a cliff it couldn't yet see. And he thought about a cream-colored shoe with a coffee stain. He hadn't been bothered by what happened that morning. Not the way most people assumed he should have been. What had bothered him, the thing that had sat at the back of his mind all day, like a low, persistent note, wasn't the humiliation. It was the waste. The sheer, careless waste of a person who had that much power and that little interest in looking at who was actually in the room with her. Warren Hale had never once, in all the years Silas knew him, failed to look at who was in the room. That had been his gift, his genuine gift. Not the money, not the instincts, not the vision, those were tools. The gift was the seeing. Warren could walk into any space and immediately, almost involuntarily, register every person in it as a full human being with a full life. He didn't perform it. He didn't make a show of it. He just did it, naturally, constantly. And the company he'd built had been shaped by that quality at every level. Silas wasn't sure Alexandra Hale had ever been taught to see people that way, and he wasn't sure watching her over the past 6 weeks that she'd learned it on her own. "Dinner's ready," Elena said. He got up, went to the cabinet for plates, and they ate together at the kitchen table the way they did every night, talking about her classes, about a book she was reading, about a friend's drama that she relayed with dry humor and genuine compassion in equal measure. Normal. Warm. The kind of evening that reminded him what he was actually working for. Later, after Elena was in her room with her homework, Silas sat in the living room with his laptop and opened the technical documentation he'd kept backed up on a private drive for 12 years. The original architecture files. The system blueprints he and a small team of engineers had built from scratch in a rented office in 2012 running on cold coffee, and the shared conviction that they were building something that mattered. He found the section he was looking for in under 2 minutes. He read it twice, closed the laptop, and sat in the quiet of his living room for a while. The system error the analysts were worried about, the one the technical team had been chasing for 3 weeks, the one that was threatening the contract renewal. The one that had made the news today, he knew exactly what it was. He'd seen this failure mode before. He'd documented it. There was a note in the original architecture files, in his own handwriting, that described precisely this scenario and precisely how to resolve it. 3 weeks of his company's engineers working on a problem he could fix in an afternoon. He sat with that knowledge the way a man sits with something heavy. Not dramatically. Not with anger. Just honestly, quietly acknowledging the weight of it. Then he closed his eyes and he breathed, and he thought patience is a choice. He went to bed at 10:15. He set his alarm for 5:30. He had a pickup scheduled for 7 a.m. Tomorrow, he was scheduled to drive Alexandra Hale again. Silas was already in the car engine idling when Alexandra came through the revolving doors at 7:04 the next morning. He watched her in the rearview mirror, dark coat hair pulled back, phone pressed to her ear before she'd even cleared the building entrance. She crossed the sidewalk without looking up, reached for the door handle, got in, and continued her conversation as if the car were simply an extension of whatever room she'd just left. "No, Marcus. I don't want a revised projection. I want the actual numbers. If your team can't produce actual numbers by Thursday, then I need to know that now, not Thursday." A pause. "Good. Then I'll see them Thursday." She hung up and finally looked at the rearview mirror at Silas. A half-second of recognition, the same driver as yesterday, and then she was already looking at her phone again. "Lower Wacker to Michigan. I have a breakfast meeting at the Langham." "Yes, ma'am." He pulled away from the curb smoothly. "There's construction on Lower Wacker this week, starting at 6 a.m. The south lane is blocked from Wells to Columbus. Might be quicker to take the surface route Madison to Michigan, should add maybe 4 minutes, but you won't sit in merge traffic." She looked up from her phone, nodded him at the back of his head technically via the mirror. "Lower Wacker," she said again, as if she hadn't heard him, or as if she had, and had decided his input was roughly equivalent to the radio offering to change its own station. "Understood," Silas said. They sat in the construction backup for 11 minutes. He could see it in the mirror, the minute compression of her expression, the slight tightening around her eyes that she probably wasn't aware of. She made 2 calls during the wait, both brief, both in that same flat, decisive tone. She didn't acknowledge the traffic. She didn't say anything to him. When they finally cleared the backup and pulled up in front of the Langham, she was out of the car in under 4 seconds, already moving toward the entrance, and the only thing she said was, "Back here at 9:30. "I'll be here," Silas said to a door that was already closing. He pulled away from the curb and spent the next 90 minutes parked 2 blocks east with a cup of coffee and the technical documentation open on his phone. He read old architecture notes. He cross-referenced a failure sequence he'd identified last night against the most recent system logs he had access to through his board member credentials. The picture that emerged was not complicated, not if you knew where to look. The problem was in the original synchronization layer, a handshake protocol between 2 legacy modules that had been updated separately over the years without anyone catching the drift in their timing variables. Every engineer on the current technical team had been hired after 2018. None of them had worked with the original system. They were looking for a software bug in the new code, and the problem was in the old code in a section that hadn't been touched in 6 years, because everyone assumed it was stable. It was stable until it wasn't. He thought about sending an email. He'd thought about it last night too. He had the board credentials. He had the technical access. He could have written it all up in a clear single-page memo and sent it to the engineering director, and it would have been fixed by the end of the week. He'd started that email twice. Both times he'd closed it without sending. Not because of pride, not because of anything petty. He genuinely examined his own motives and found nothing petty there. He closed the emails because something told him it wasn't the right moment. That the lesson, if there was one to be had here, needed to arrive a different way. He wasn't entirely certain he was right about that. But he'd learned to trust that instinct. At 9:28, he pulled back up to the Langham. Alexandra came out at 9:31, which was close enough to on time that he registered it. She got in, and before he could even pull away from the curb, she said without looking up, "Who told you about the construction?" He glanced at the mirror. "I drive this route most mornings. I pay attention to what's happening on the roads." She looked up then. Actually, looked at him in the mirror, not through him, not past him, but at him, with the sharp evaluating quality that was probably her default mode in any meeting. "You drive this route every day. Most days. And you knew about the construction before we left?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you suggested an alternate route?" "Yes, ma'am." A beat. "How long have you been driving for Hale Dynamics?" "About 14 months with your company's contract, 6 weeks on your specific detail." She held his gaze in the mirror for another moment, then looked back at her phone. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't apologize for not taking the suggestion, didn't acknowledge the 11 minutes of unnecessary traffic. But something had shifted in the quality of her silence. It was slightly less total. Like a door that had been completely shut was now closed but not latched. They rode the rest of the way to the office without talking. Silas pulled into the building's drop-off loop and came to a stop. He heard her gather her things. Then she paused, and he caught it in the mirror, a half-second of something that wasn't quite hesitation, but wasn't her usual forward momentum either. "What did you say your name was?" she asked. "Silas," he said. "Silas Whitmore." Another pause, shorter this time. She got out. He sat there for a moment after she'd gone through the doors. He was aware of a feeling that he didn't immediately name. It was something adjacent to a kind of tiredness, not physical, something older than that. The tiredness of a man who has been in rooms, metaphorically speaking, for a long time and has had to wait considerably longer than he should have to be seen in them. He drove to the school to drop off Elena's forgotten water bottle because she'd texted him between the Langham and the office. He did 4 more airport pickups that afternoon. He ate lunch in the car, a sandwich from a deli on Damon turkey on rye decent enough. By 4:30, he was done for the day. He picked Elena up at 5 from her after-school program. She got in the car and immediately looked at him with that look. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She buckled her seatbelt. "You look like you're thinking hard about something." "I'm always thinking hard about something. Harder than usual." He pulled out of the school lot. "She asked my name today." Elena turned toward him slightly. "The CEO, Alexandra Hale." Did she recognize it?" "I don't think so." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Do you want her to?" It was a good question. A genuinely good question from a 16-year-old who paid better attention than most adults he knew. He didn't answer it right away. He drove 2 blocks, made a left, and thought about it seriously. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I want her to figure it out. There's a difference." Elena turned back to face forward. "That sounds like something Grandma Whitmore would have said. Your grandmother was a smart woman. She was also incredibly stubborn." He said. "Runs in the family." Elena smiled at that just slightly and looked out the window. That evening, the news ran another segment on Hale Dynamics. Silas watched it from the kitchen while Elena was in her room. The anchor summarized it efficiently. The system failure that had been dogging Hale Dynamics for nearly a month was now attracting attention from shareholders and industry analysts. One analyst described the situation as a credibility problem as much as a technical one. The company's biggest contract, a 7-year infrastructure management deal with a consortium of Midwestern hospitals, came up for renewal in 31 days. The hospital's board was reportedly watching closely. If the system issues weren't resolved, there was increasing speculation they might open the renewal to competing bids. 700 jobs. That was the number he came back to. 470 at headquarters, the rest at satellite offices and client sites. 700 families. People who got up every morning and came to work and trusted that the foundation under their feet was solid. He turned the television off. He sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his phone and opened his contacts. He scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 8 months, Donna Reeves, who had been Warren's chief of staff for 11 years and was now, as far as Silas knew, working as an independent consultant. He'd always liked Donna. She was precise without being cold, and she understood the company at a level that most people with far more impressive titles didn't. He typed a text. "Donna. It's Silas Whitmore. Hope you're well. I have a question that's going to sound strange. Do you have 10 minutes this week?" Her reply came back in under 3 minutes. "Silas. Lord, it's been too long. Call me tonight if you want. I'm up until 11. He called her at 8:15 after Elena had gone to bed. "Silas Whitmore," Donna said when she picked up. Her voice was warm and direct the way it always was. "Tell me you're not calling because of what's on the news." "I'm not calling only because of what's on the news," he said. "Uh-huh." He heard her settle into a chair. "All right, talk. How much are you still plugged into what's happening over there?" "Enough," she said carefully. "More than I probably should be for my own peace of mind. Why? I know what the system problem is." A silence. "Of course you do," she said in a tone that wasn't surprise so much as a kind of rueful, complicated recognition. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks with certainty, longer with suspicion. "And you haven't?" "No." "Silas." Her voice shifted into something he remembered from board meetings, a certain precision that meant she was choosing words carefully. "You understand that if that contract falls apart, 700 jobs," he said. "I know. So why haven't you?" "Because if I send an email, they fix the technical problem and nothing else changes." He said it quietly without drama, the way a man states a thing he's thought through from every angle. The way she's running that company, Donna. The decisions she's making. The people she's pushed out. The culture that's eroding. Warren built something that was more than a revenue line, and I've been watching it hollow out for 2 years, and I've put it in writing twice and been politely acknowledged and ignored. Fixing this one thing fixes this one thing. Another silence. Longer this time. "You're waiting for a moment," Donna said. "I'm waiting for the right moment." "That's a very fine line you're walking." "I know. 700 jobs, Silas." "I know, Donna. If you wait too long, I won't wait too long." He said it with a certainty that surprised even him slightly. "I know that system the way I know my daughter's face. I know exactly how much time there is before it becomes unrecoverable. I'm not gambling with those jobs. I'm protecting something larger than one system error." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said more softly, "Warren used to talk about you, you know. When things got complicated and he wasn't sure what the right move was. He'd say, 'I'm going to think about it the way Silas thinks about it. Slow it down. Look at the whole thing.'" A pause. "I've missed that around there." He didn't know what to say to that. He let the silence hold it. "All right," Donna said. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. I just needed to know someone else understood the full picture." "I understand it," she said. "Don't wait too long." "I won't," he said. They talked for another 20 minutes about her consulting work, about Elena, about a mutual friend from the early Hale Dynamics days who'd started a company of his own. When he hung up, the house was completely quiet. He could hear the neighbor's dog from 2 houses down, and the distant sound of a car on the street, and his own breathing steady and even. He went to bed at 9:50. He lay in the dark and thought about Warren. He thought about the day they'd first demoed the system for a room full of potential investors, the two of them standing at the front of a conference room in rented suits. Warren doing the talking and Silas handling the technical demonstration, and halfway through the demo, a critical component had frozen on screen, and Warren hadn't missed a single beat. He'd turned to the room and said with complete composure, "This is actually a perfect opportunity to show you how the system handles recovery." And then he'd looked at Silas with complete and absolute confidence. And Silas had fixed it in 90 seconds, and 6 people in that room had written checks. That kind of confidence. The kind that didn't require any performance because it was built entirely on actually knowing who was standing next to you. Alexandra Hale had looked at him in the mirror today and asked his name. It was a start, he thought. Small, but real. He closed his eyes. 3 days passed. He drove Alexandra twice more, once to a meeting in Evanston, once to O'Hare, to collect a board member flying in from New York. The quality of the silence in the car was changing. He couldn't have explained it to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but he was paying close attention, and it was changing. She had stopped being quite so total in her dismissal of his presence. She still didn't initiate conversation. But once on the way back from O'Hare, she'd been on a call that had clearly gone badly, and when she hung up, she'd sat for nearly 2 full minutes saying nothing, staring out the window, and the quality of that silence was different from her usual productive distance. It was the silence of a woman who was possibly for the first time in a while uncertain. On the 4th day, a Thursday, she got in the car and said without preamble, "You suggested Madison to Michigan on Monday." "Yes, ma'am." "You knew the construction schedule?" "I did." "How many routes into the loop do you have mapped?" He considered the question. "Most of them," he said. "I started keeping informal route notes when I took this job. Traffic patterns, construction cycles, event schedules that affect parking and flow. It helps me get people where they're going on time." A pause. "That's not in your job description." "No, ma'am. But it gets results." She looked at him in the mirror. He met her eyes briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Where did you work before this?" she asked. "Engineering," he said simply. "A while back." "What kind?" "Systems architecture mostly." She held that for a moment, and he wondered not for the first time if the name Silas Whitmore had registered anywhere in her memory. If she'd seen it in the board records, in the founding documents, in any of the materials she would have reviewed when she took over the company. It was possible she hadn't. It was possible that the name on those documents was a category of information she'd processed without attaching to a face, without imagining that the face might someday be driving her to breakfast meetings. "Why did you stop?" she asked. He thought about that. "I didn't stop exactly," he said. "I changed how I was doing it." She seemed to sit with that answer, and he could see her turning it over in her mind, filing it in whatever organizational system she used for information that didn't immediately resolve into a clean category. "Take Michigan to Randolph," she said. "I need to make a stop." "Yes, ma'am." They rode in the kind of silence that had finally slowly begun to have some acknowledgement in it. Not warmth. Not yet. but something. The faint beginning of the recognition that the other person in the room or the car was actually present, actually real, actually possibly worth something beyond their immediate function. It wasn't much. But Silas had spent his life understanding that the most important changes were always the ones that began small beneath the surface, in the space between what a person showed the world and what they were actually starting to understand. He drove. He waited. He thought about Elena, who would be home from school in 4 hours, probably making herself a snack, and reading in that particular patch of afternoon light by the living room window that she'd claimed as hers since she was 9 years old. He thought about 700 jobs. He thought about 31 days ticking down one by one, quiet and patient, and completely indifferent to whether anyone was ready. And he thought about the exact moment, the technical term was cascade failure, when the timing drift hit a critical threshold, and the legacy synchronization layer collapsed. And he thought about how close that moment was, and how clearly he could see it coming, and how absolutely certain he was of exactly what he would do when it arrived. Not yet, he told himself, but soon. The call came on a Tuesday at 6:47 in the morning. Silas was in the parking structure earlier than usual, finishing his coffee before the first pickup of the day. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Not a text, an actual call, which was unusual enough at that hour that he looked at it immediately. The number wasn't in his contacts, but he recognized the 312 area code. Downtown Chicago. He picked up. "Is this Silas Whitmore?" A man's voice, tight and fast, the particular tension of someone who has been awake for a long time, working on a problem that isn't getting better. "It is." "Mr. Whitmore, my name is Greg Paulson. I'm the Director of Engineering at Hale Dynamics. I'm calling because—" A pause, and in that pause, Silas could hear the sound of a large room behind the man. Keyboards voices the specific ambient frequency of a technical team in crisis mode. "I'm calling because your name is on the original architecture documentation for our core system. I've been up since midnight and I'm out of ideas and I need to talk to someone who actually built this thing." Silas held the phone and was quiet for exactly 1 second. "How did you get this number?" "Donna Reeves," Paulson said. "She said you'd understand." He closed his eyes briefly. Of course. Donna. He'd told her not yet, and she'd held it as long as she could, and evidently last night had been long enough. He didn't feel angry about it. He felt the particular clarity that comes when a decision gets made for you by circumstances that were always going to arrive eventually. "Tell me where you are," Silas said. 14th floor. Engineering operations. Building's open, I'll leave your name at security. Give me 12 minutes. He was there in 10. The 14th floor was a different world from the lobby. No marble, no art on the walls, no performance of corporate success. It was a working floor. Long rows of workstations, monitors in clusters of 4 and 6 whiteboards covered in diagrams and notations that hadn't been erased in days, judging by the layered colors of marker. It smelled like the particular combination of recycled air and sustained human effort that Silas remembered from the early years when he and a team of 7 had spent entire weeks in rooms not unlike this one. Greg Paulson was 32, maybe 33, with the look of a man who had been technically excellent his entire career, and was currently experiencing, for possibly the first time, a problem that his excellence alone couldn't solve. He shook Silas's hand with a grip that was a little too firm. The grip of a man trying to project confidence he didn't currently have. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I want to be straight with you. I wasn't sure about making this call. I still don't entirely know who you are in the context of this company, but I've been through every line of new code 4 times, and I can't find the source of the failure, and Donna said you built the original synchronization layer, and at this point—" "Show me the logs," Silas said. Paulson blinked. He'd been prepared for more preamble, more establishing of context, and then nodded and led him to the main diagnostic workstation. A younger engineer, a woman named Keisha, who couldn't have been more than 26, scooted sideways to make room without being asked. She had the slightly hollow look of someone who'd been drinking coffee instead of sleeping. Silas pulled the chair in and looked at the screen. He didn't touch anything yet. He just read. He read the way he always read technical documentation, completely still absorbing, letting the pattern assemble itself without forcing it. Around him, he could feel the team watching him. 8 people in various states of exhaustion and worry, watching a man in a driver's uniform sit down at their primary diagnostic workstation and read their logs. "The timestamps," he said after about 90 seconds. Paulson leaned in. "What about them? Here and here." He pointed without touching the screen 2 separate entries in the log file 43 minutes apart. "The interval. Do you see it?" Paulson stared. "It's within tolerance. It's within the tolerance the system was updated to in 2019, Silas said. It's not within the tolerance the synchronization layer was originally calibrated to in 2013. Those 2 numbers are different. Nobody caught the drift because each individual update was approved in isolation, and no one was tracking the cumulative variance against the original baseline." He paused. "It's in the handshake protocol, between modules 7 and 11. The timing window has been narrowing by approximately 0.003 seconds per major update cycle. You're now at a window that's too narrow for the legacy synchronization to complete reliably under peak load conditions." Complete silence on the 14th floor. Keisha was the first one to speak. "Oh my God," she said very quietly, looking at the screen. "That's how did we not—" "Because you were looking at the new code," Silas said. "The problem is in the old code, the part everyone assumed was stable." Paulson was staring at him now, not at the screen, at him. "How do you know what the original calibration was?" "Because I said it," Silas said. "In December of 2013, in this building on a different floor, with Warren Hale looking over my shoulder, asking if I was sure about the timing window, and me telling him I was sure, and me being right about that, and nobody checking it since." The room had gone very still. "I need right access to the configuration layer," Silas said. "And I need whoever has administrative credentials for the legacy module interface to be standing next to me." Paulson was still processing. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you directly. Who are you in terms of this company?" "Donna said, she said you're a co-founder, but—" "I'm a co-founder," Silas confirmed. "I own 50% of the equity. I have a board seat. I've been attending quarterly meetings for 3 years." A pause. "I've also been driving Ms. Hale to her breakfast meetings for the past 6 weeks, which I understand is a confusing data point." Another silence, a different quality than the first, this one tipping slightly toward the surreal. "She doesn't know," Paulson said. "It wasn't a question." "She asked my name last week," Silas said. "I don't believe she connected it." Keisha made a small sound that was almost a laugh but wasn't quite. She covered it with her hand. "The administrative credentials," Silas said, redirecting gently. "We have time to sort the rest of it out afterward. Right now, what needs to happen is that someone gives me access to the configuration layer so I can widen the synchronization window back to its original parameters and set a validation checkpoint that will prevent this specific drift from occurring again." Paulson looked at him for one more moment. Then, something in him settled the particular settling of a man who has been in a crisis long enough that pragmatism overrides protocol, and he nodded once. "Keisha," he said, "get him the credentials." It took Silas 47 minutes, not because the fix was complicated. The fix itself, the actual technical resolution, took less than 15. The remaining 32 minutes were the careful, methodical work of verification, running the corrected configuration through test cycles, confirming the synchronization handshake was completing within proper tolerance across all load scenarios, documenting the changes in the system log with enough specificity that any engineer who looked at it in the future would understand exactly what had been corrected and why. He did this without being asked, because it was the right thing to do. Because the point wasn't just to fix the problem, It was to fix it in a way that left the system better understood than it had been before. Around the 30-minute mark, people on the floor had stopped pretending to work on other things. They were watching him. Not obtrusively, not in a crowd, just the kind of quiet peripheral attention that forms naturally when someone in a room is doing something that the room has collectively understood is significant. Keisha had pulled a second chair alongside him and was following every step, asking questions in a low voice, and he answered each one fully, without impatience, because she was smart and her questions were good, and because teaching was never a waste of time. At the 47-minute mark, he leaned back in the chair and said, "Run the full load simulation." Keisha ran it. The screen populated with data in about 20 seconds, green across every parameter, synchronization handshake completing at 100% reliability across all test scenarios, response time inside normal range. The room exhaled. Paulson, who had been standing behind Silas's right shoulder for the past 20 minutes without saying a word, let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since midnight. "That's it," he said. "It's resolved." "The immediate problem is resolved," Silas said. "You'll want to do a full audit of the other legacy module interfaces for similar calibration drift. I can put together a document outlining where to look and what thresholds to check. It won't happen overnight, but it should happen." "Yes," Paulson said. "Absolutely. Whatever you need." He paused. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't know how to—" "You don't have to," Silas said. He stood up, straightened his jacket. He looked at Keisha. "Good instincts," he told her. "The question you asked about the validation interval, that's exactly the right thing to be checking. Don't lose that habit." She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between professional gratitude and something more personal, the look of someone who has just watched a masterwork and is recalibrating everything they thought they knew. "Yes, sir," she said. He was heading toward the elevator when he heard Paulson say behind him, "Ms. Hale is going to want to speak with you." Silas pressed the elevator button. "I imagine so," he said. He was in the lobby when his phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Good luck today, Dad, whatever it is you're doing." He stopped walking and read it twice. He hadn't told her anything specific. She'd just known the way she sometimes did with that quiet radar of hers. He typed back, "Thank you. I'll tell you about it tonight." He put his phone in his pocket. He was almost at the lobby doors when he heard the elevator open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know. The sound of those heels on marble was something he could have identified in a crowded room by now. "Mr. Whitmore." He turned. Alexandra Hale stood 12 feet away from him in the middle of the lobby. She had her phone in her hand, and her coat was slightly less perfect than usual. One lapel folded slightly under where she must have put it on quickly, and there was a quality in her face that he had not seen in 6 weeks of watching her. Not uncertainty exactly. Something harder to name. The expression of someone who has just had a fixed point in their understanding of the world shift unexpectedly, and who is with visible effort staying upright while their mind recalibrates. "You fixed it," she said. "Yes. In 47 minutes. She said it like she was confirming a fact she was still processing. "My engineering team has been working on this problem for 26 days. They were looking in the wrong place," he said. "Not their fault. The original documentation wasn't easy to access, and the failure mode was in legacy code that everyone assumed was stable." She looked at him. The lobby was occupied, the morning flow of employees, the front desk staff, Darnell at his post, and several people were clearly aware that something was happening in this specific corner of the space, and were performing elaborate acts of not looking while looking. "Greg Paulson just called me," she said. "He told me—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. "He told me your name is on the original architecture documentation." "It is." "He told me you co-founded this company." "I did." "With my father." "With your father," he confirmed. She held that. He watched her hold it, watched the information move through her, watched the connections form that should have been formed years ago. He had a moment of genuine compassion for her then, which surprised him slightly with its completeness. It wasn't pity, It wasn't satisfaction. It was simply the understanding of what it must feel like to discover that a significant piece of your reality was not assembled the way you believed it was. He knew something about that feeling himself. "You've been driving me," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "For 6 weeks." "Yes. And you never—" She stopped again, started differently. "Why didn't you say anything?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I wanted to understand what was happening to the company," he said. "From a perspective I couldn't get in a boardroom." Something moved across her face, quick, not quite identifiable. "And what did you understand?" "Quite a bit," he said. A beat. Then quieter. "Were you planning to just watch while the system failure took down the hospital contract?" "No," he said. And he said it with the same simple certainty he'd used with Donna on the phone 2 weeks ago. "I knew exactly when I needed to step in. I was never going to let 700 jobs disappear." She stared at him. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something break through the surface of her expression that was not the CEO's face, not the daughter's face, not the face she showed boardrooms and business meetings. Something underneath all of that. Something young and tired and not entirely sure of itself. It was gone in a second. She straightened almost imperceptibly. "My office," she said. 10 minutes. "I have a pickup scheduled at 9:15, he said. She blinked. He thought for just an instant that she might actually smile at that. She didn't quite, but it was close. "I'll have someone cover it," she said. She turned and walked to the elevator. He stood in the lobby and watched her go. Darnell caught his eye from the security desk, and his expression was the fullest it had been in 6 weeks, wide-eyed and careful and containing with visible effort everything he wanted to say. Silas crossed to the desk. "Darnell," he said, "I might be a minute." "Mr. Whitmore," Darnell said, and his voice was the measured, deliberate voice of a man being very precise. "Take all the time you need." Silas rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, the executive level. A floor he had not been on in 2 years, not since the last in-person board meeting. The receptionist outside Alexandra's office looked at his driver's uniform, and then at her computer screen, and then back at him, recalibrating in real time. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, with the slight uncertainty of someone working from instructions that didn't entirely cohere with the situation in front of her. "That's right," he said. "She said to send you right in." He opened the door. Alexandra's office had changed from when Warren used it. Warren had kept it relatively spare, a desk, a work table, bookshelves full of actual books that he'd actually read, a single framed photograph of the company's founding team on the day they'd signed the original partnership agreement. Silas was in that photograph. He had a copy of it somewhere in his house, in a box in the closet that he didn't open often. That photograph was not in this office. The office was sleek and impersonal in the way of a space designed to communicate authority. It communicated it effectively. But it didn't communicate Warren. Alexandra was standing at the window when he came in. She turned when she heard the door. She had her arms crossed, not defensively. It read more like she was holding herself together in the specific way of a person who was accustomed to holding themselves together and was currently doing it very deliberately. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't sit. She stood by the window and looked at him, and he let her look, and the silence stretched for a few seconds, in that particular way that sometimes happens when two people are in a room and the air between them is full of things that haven't been said yet. "The equity," she said finally. 50%, he said. "Same as your father. It's in the founding documents." "I know it's in the documents." A pause. "I reviewed those documents when I took over. Your name is in them. Silas Whitmore, co-founder." She took a breath. I didn't connect it to you. When you were assigned as my driver, I didn't." "I know," he said. The 2 words were not unkind. They were simply true. And she heard the truth in them, and he watched it land on her with the particular weight of an honest thing that has been gently but precisely placed. She uncrossed her arms. She moved to the desk, but didn't sit behind it. She leaned against the front edge of it facing him. It was a different posture from any he'd seen from her before, less performed. "Greg tells me you documented the entire fix," she said, "and identified 4 other areas of the legacy system that need the same kind of audit." "Yes." "He said you also spent time explaining it to one of his junior engineers. She was asking the right questions." Alexandra looked at him steadily. "My father used to do that," she said. "He used to say the best thing you could do with knowledge was put it somewhere it would grow." A beat. "He talked about you," she said. "Not often, but when he did he was—" She stopped, started again. "He was certain about you. In a way he wasn't certain about very many people." Silas said nothing. He felt the weight of that settle into the room, and he let it stay there respectfully. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Alexandra." "No." Her voice was firm, but not hard. "I owe you an apology. What happened in the lobby last week? The shoe." Her jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, with something more like honest shame, which is the harder of the two. "I didn't know who you were, but that isn't the point. I treated you like you were—" She paused, searching for the word. "Like you were less," she said quietly. "And that's not who I want to be." Silas looked at her. She was 34 years old, and she had been handed one of the heaviest things a person can be, handed a parent's legacy. A company full of people's livelihoods, an identity tied to an inheritance she hadn't entirely had time to earn yet. She was not. He understood now with complete clarity, a bad person. She was a person who had been moving too fast to see clearly. There was a difference. Warren had understood that difference instinctively about everyone. Silas understood it too, though he'd had to learn it more slowly. "Apology accepted," he said. She looked at him, and he saw it again, that thing beneath the surface. Steadier now, less buried. "The board meeting is Thursday," she said. "I assume you'll be there." "I'll be there," he said. "I think," she said, and she said it with a careful precision that told him she meant every word, "that we have quite a lot to talk about." "We do," he agreed. He stood. She straightened from the desk. For a moment, they were both simply standing in the room. Two people who were about to have a very different relationship than the one they'd had for the past 6 weeks, feeling the exact shape of that change as it settled around them. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Silas," he said. A pause. Then quietly, "Silas." She said it like she was trying the weight of it. "My father, did he know you were driving for us?" He held her gaze. "Your father has been gone for 3 years," he said gently. "But I think he would have found it instructive." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she turned back to the window and he walked to the door, and when he opened it and stepped out into the hallway, his face held the same expression it had held in the lobby that first morning when he'd knelt on the marble floor and cleaned a coffee stain off an expensive shoe. Calm, patient, completely, entirely certain of who he was. The elevator came. He wrote it down. He walked through the lobby, nodded to Darnell, and pushed through the revolving doors into the cool morning air of downtown Chicago. He had a call to make. He stood on the sidewalk, found Elena's number, and called. It rang 3 times. She was in class, she wouldn't pick up. He got her voicemail, her recorded voice bright and slightly exasperated in the way of a teenager who finds the concept of voicemail antiquated. "You've reached Elena, leave a message, Dad." "Hey, Elle," he said. He was quiet for a second, watching the street, the people moving past, the ordinary, extraordinary motion of a city morning. "I'll tell you about it tonight. But I think things are going to be okay." Another pause. "Love you more." He put the phone in his pocket. The wind off the lake had come up, the particular sharp, clean wind that Chicago did better than anywhere else on earth. And he stood in it for a moment, with his face toward it, and he breathed. Thursday was 2 days away. He had a lot of work to do before Thursday. He spent Wednesday the way he spent most days that mattered, quietly, methodically, without announcement. He drove his morning routes. He picked up a consultant from the Intercontinental at 7, a junior VP from a River North apartment at 8:15, a visiting client from O'Hare at 10. He was on time for every one of them. He was professional and present, and he didn't spend the drives on his phone the way some drivers didn't fill the silence with radio he didn't want. He drove. He thought. He let the city move around him the way it always did, indifferent and enormous, and somehow still, after all these years, capable of making him feel like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Between pickups, he sat in the car and wrote, not code, not technical documentation, though he'd already sent Paulson a 14-page legacy audit framework Tuesday evening that had generated from Paulson a response consisting entirely of the words, "This is extraordinary, thank you." What Silas wrote on Wednesday in the Notes app on his phone, because he didn't have anything else convenient, was something closer to a statement of intent. What he believed the company was. What he believed it had been built to do. What he believed it was in danger of losing, not because Alexandra was malicious, but because she'd been handed the wheel of a ship at high speed and told to keep it moving without anyone sitting down with her first and explaining what the original course had been set toward and why. He wrote it plainly. No corporate language, no strategic framework terminology, no slides. Just the truth in plain American sentences, the way Warren had always insisted on communicating when it really mattered. Warren had hated jargon with a particular passion. Jargon, he used to say, is what people use when they're not sure enough of an idea to say it in plain English. Silas had inherited that bias completely. By the time he picked Elena up from school Wednesday afternoon, he had 6 pages of notes and a clarity in his chest that felt like the morning after a long illness, not full strength yet, but real and clean and pointing forward. Elena got in the car, looked at him, and said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. She thought about it. "Like when you finish fixing something." He said. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. All of it or most of it, the parts she needed to understand what was happening and what it meant. He told her about the engineering floor, about Paulson's call about Keisha, and the diagnostic workstation. And 47 minutes, and a timing window narrowed to crisis by 6 years of incremental updates that nobody had tracked against the original baseline. He told her about the lobby afterward, about Alexandra saying "my office 10 minutes, about the photograph that wasn't on the wall anymore, and the apology that was, about Thursday's board meeting. Elena listened without interrupting, which was one of her best qualities, and not, he privately suspected, inherited from him. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do at the board meeting?" "Say what needs to be said." "Which is?" "That the company needs to reconnect with what it was built for," he said. "That growth and profit are tools, not purposes. That the people Warren hired and trained and trusted, the ones who are still there, and the ones who were let go in ways they shouldn't have been, they're the actual infrastructure, not the software, not the contracts. The people." Elena looked out the window. "Are you going to go back?" she asked. "Like officially, full time?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That's a conversation for Thursday." She nodded slowly. "Are you nervous?" He thought about that. "No," he said. Then, "Maybe a little." "Good," she said with complete seriousness. "A little nervous means you care about it." He reached over and briefly squeezed her shoulder. She let him, which at 16 she didn't always, and he noticed that and filed it away in the category of things he was grateful for, which was a category he tried to maintain consciously every day because it was easy to let it get crowded out. The board meeting was at 9 a.m. Silas arrived at 8:45 in his own car, a 7-year-old Subaru that he'd maintained himself every oil change, every brake pad, with the particular satisfaction of a man who knows exactly what's under the hood. He wore a dark gray suit that he'd bought 3 years ago for Warren's funeral and had worn to every board meeting since. It still fit. He hadn't gained weight because he hadn't changed his habits. And he hadn't changed his habits because his habits were good ones, built over years of paying attention to what his body and his mind actually needed, as opposed to what was convenient. He stopped at the front desk. Darnell looked up. "Good morning, Silas," he said, and his voice had something in it, a quiet pride or something adjacent to pride, the feeling a person gets when someone they've been rooting for is about to step onto the right field. "Good morning, Darnell." Silas paused at the desk. "How long have you been working here?" "Going on 9 years," Darnell said. "You knew Warren?" "Yes, sir. He knew my name the first day I worked here. Never forgot it after that." He paused. "Never missed it by a single day." Silas nodded. "Neither will I," he said. He rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The boardroom was at the end of the hallway, a long glass-walled room with a table that seated 20, and a view of the lake that had been one of Warren's conditions when they'd signed the lease on this building. "I need to be able to see something real," Warren had told the real estate agent. Not another building, something real. The lake had qualified. The lake on a clear November morning still qualified, though Silas only registered it briefly before turning his attention to the people in the room. There were 8 board members present, plus Alexandra at the head of the table, plus the company's legal counsel and CFO seated along the side wall. Several faces Silas recognized from previous meetings. A few he didn't appointments made after Warren's death people, who would know Silas's name from documents, but not from experience. He came through the door, and the room rearranged its attention. Not dramatically. Just the particular shift that happens when the person who just entered is someone the room was already thinking about. Silas. Martin Graves, the longest-serving board member, 71 years old, silver-haired, a man who had known Warren since college, stood and extended a hand. His grip was firm and warm. "It has been too long since you were at this table in person." "Yes, it has," Silas agreed, and he meant it. He took his seat third from the head on the right side of the table, the same seat he'd always used because he and Warren had established positions early and it had never changed. He set his single folder of notes on the table in front of him. He looked down the table at Alexandra. She met his eyes. She held them. Her expression was composed in the professional way it always was, but underneath the composure, he could see something that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago or even Tuesday morning. Something that was paying attention in a different way. Something that had possibly slowed down just enough to actually see the room it was in. "Good morning," she said to him specifically. "Good morning," he said. The meeting opened with the CFO's report. Numbers, projections, the financial picture of a company that was still strong on paper, but had been absorbing the kind of internal friction that doesn't show up on a balance sheet until it's gone on long enough. Silas listened carefully. He heard in the numbers what he'd been hearing for 2 years, a company that was running efficiently in the short term and eroding slowly in the ways that mattered for the long term. Customer retention metrics that were declining by increments small enough to ignore individually but alarming in aggregate. Employee tenure dropping. The average years of experience walking out the door with every departure. When the CFO finished, Martin Graves said, "I think before we go further, we ought to address the events of Tuesday morning. Silas, would you walk us through what happened?" Silas did. He walked them through it the way he'd walked Paulson through the diagnostic clearly, without drama, without self-congratulation. He described the problem, the solution, the documentation he'd provided, the audit framework he'd sent. He explained why the failure had been invisible to the current engineering team and how it could be prevented from recurring. He answered 4 questions from board members, all of them technical, all of them good questions, all of them answered in plain English. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Howard Klim, one of the newer board members appointed 18 months ago, private equity background, the kind of man who measured things in quarters, leaned forward and said, "Silas, if I'm understanding this correctly, you've been aware of this system issue for approximately 3 weeks. "Correct," Silas said. "And you chose not to report it through normal channels during that time." "I chose the timing of my intervention," Silas said. "Which is a different thing." "Is it?" Klim's tone was precise and not unfriendly, but was the tone of a man who found this narrative troubling in a specific way. 700 jobs. A 31-day window on the hospital contract. And you, the co-founder, the 50% equity holder, chose to drive the CEO to breakfast meetings while waiting for a... He paused, searching for the right word. For the right moment, Silas said. For the right moment, Klim repeated. Help me understand what that means in practical terms. It means, Silas said, that a technical fix applied in isolation fixes a technical problem. What this company has isn't only a technical problem. It's a foundational problem. A slow separation between what Hale Dynamics was built to be and what it's been becoming. If I send an email 2 weeks ago and Paulson's team corrects the configuration, we preserve the contract, which is essential, and we change nothing else. We go back to the same trajectory. I've been watching that trajectory for 2 years. I've raised concerns about it in writing at this table twice. Both times it was noted and not addressed. He paused. I needed the company to see the problem fully, not just fix the symptom. The room was very quiet. That is, Klim said after a moment, a considerable gamble with other people's livelihoods. Yes, Silas said. It was. I knew that, and I accepted that responsibility. And I also knew, with as much certainty as I've ever known anything technically exactly, when the failure would become critical and unrecoverable. I was never past that line. He looked at Klim steadily. I did not gamble with 700 jobs. I risked a 3-week window on a problem I could resolve in 47 minutes. That's a different calculation. Martin Graves made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was its quiet cousin. Warren used to do something like that, he said to the table generally. Hold information until the moment it would land correctly, rather than just land. He looked at Silas. It was infuriating, and it was almost always right. Alexandra spoke for the first time since the meeting had shifted to this territory. She'd been listening with a stillness that Silas had come to recognize as her genuine attention rather than her performed attention. They were different, and he'd learned the difference. I want to say something, she said, and the room gave her the floor without hesitation. On Tuesday morning in the lobby after Greg called me, I asked Silas why he hadn't said anything, about who he was, and he said he wanted to understand what was happening to the company from a perspective he couldn't get in a boardroom. She paused. I've been thinking about that since Tuesday, about what he might have seen from that perspective that I haven't been seeing from this one. The room waited. I've been running this company for 3 years, she said. And I think I've been running it the way you run a race, fast and forward and measuring myself against the clock. My father didn't run it that way. She said it plainly, without self-pity, without performance. I've known that. I've told myself it was a different time, different market, different competitive environment. Those things are true. But I've also used them to stop asking whether the way I run it is actually the way it should be run. She looked at Silas. You knew my father better than most people in this room. Yes, he said. Would he recognize this company? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Several people shifted in their seats. Howard Klim looked at the table. Martin Graves looked at Silas. Silas took a breath. He answered honestly because that was the only way he knew how to answer a question that mattered. He'd recognize the building, he said. He'd recognize the product. He'd recognize some of the people. A pause. He'd be concerned about the ones who are gone, and about the pace. Warren believed that if you moved fast enough that you couldn't hear what the people around you were actually saying, you were moving too fast. Alexandra didn't look away. And have I been moving too fast to hear? Yes, Silas said. But you're slowing down now. That's the part that matters. Something in her face shifted, fractionally controlled, but real. She nodded once and turned back to the full table, and when she spoke again, her voice was the steady, decisive voice of a CEO, but with something underneath it now that hadn't been there before this week. I want to make a proposal, she said. and I want this board's response to it." She folded her hands on the table. "I'd like to ask Silas Whitmore to take a formal operational role. Not a ceremonial one, not a board-level only function. I'm talking about a working role oversight of the technical architecture and systems integrity, and a seat at the strategy table, not just the quarterly meeting. He would have decision-making authority in his domain and direct access to every department that touches the core product." She paused. "We've had 50% of our founding expertise sitting dormant for 3 years. We can't afford to continue doing that. And frankly," her voice shifted by a fraction, "I don't want to." The silence that followed was the kind that means a room is actually thinking rather than just waiting its turn. Martin Graves spoke first. "Seconded," he said without hesitation. One by one around the table. When it reached Howard Klim, he was quiet for a moment in the way of a man reconciling a narrative he'd entered with one that was emerging. Then he nodded. "I'll support it," he said, "provided we have a clear operational framework within 60 days. He looked at Silas. "And provided Mr. Whitmore is willing to actually show up." "I'm willing," Silas said. The vote was unanimous. After the formal motion was recorded and the legal counsel began outlining the next steps for the operational framework, the meeting shifted into a territory that felt different, looser, more human. The particular energy of a room that has done something significant and is now settling into what comes next. People spoke more directly. Questions were more honest. At one point, Martin Graves told a story about the early days of the company that made 2 people laugh and made Alexandra look down at the table with an expression Silas couldn't fully read but thought might be grief and affection and the complicated love of a child reckoning with a parent they are finally a little late beginning to fully understand. The meeting ended at 11:45. People gathered their things, talked in pairs. Howard Klim shook Silas's hand briefly, with the directness of a man acknowledging a conversation that hadn't gone the way he'd expected, and who was professional enough to respect the outcome anyway. The CFO stopped him near the door to ask a question about the legacy audit timeline. He answered it, specifically promised to follow up in writing by Friday. He was almost to the elevator when Alexandra caught up to him. "Silas!" He stopped. She was slightly out of breath, which told him she'd moved quickly to reach him before the elevator, and that small fact that she had hurried registered somewhere in him as the most concrete evidence yet that something had genuinely shifted. "I want to tell you something," she said. She was keeping her voice low, not because the hallway was crowded, it wasn't, but because what she was about to say was the kind of thing that deserved to be said quietly. "When my father died, I found a box of things he kept in his desk. Personal things. There was a photograph in it." He waited. "The founding team," she said. "The day you signed the partnership agreement. My father is in it, and you're in it, and you're both laughing at something, and my father looks—" She stopped briefly. "He looks the way he looked when something was really good. Really right. He had a specific look for that, and it's in that photograph." Silas said nothing. He remembered the day. He remembered exactly what they'd been laughing at. Warren had knocked over an entire pot of coffee while trying to make a toast in a room with no champagne, and the look on his face when the coffee hit the floor had been so perfectly nakedly mortified that Silas had laughed for a solid 30 seconds, and Warren had started laughing too, and someone had taken the picture right in the middle of it. "I kept it," Alexandra said. I hadn't put it up yet." She paused. "I'm going to put it up." "Good," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, with the careful precision of someone who has thought about a question for 2 days and finally decided to ask it, "Did he ever talk to you about me, about what he wanted for me?" After he was gone. Silas looked at her. She was 34, and she was Warren's daughter, and she was standing in this hallway asking a question that was really underneath about whether her father had believed in her. He understood that question completely. He had asked himself versions of it about his own father, who had been a different kind of difficult for years. "He talked about you constantly," Silas said. "He was proud of you in a way that was almost physical when he talked about it. like it was something he couldn't entirely contain. A pause. And he worried about you, the way good parents worry about children they can see clearly. He said once that you were the most capable person he'd ever met, who was also the most afraid of slowing down. He said he didn't know how to teach you to slow down without making you think he was telling you to stop. She was very still. He believed in you, Silas said, without reservation. He just also knew you were going to have to learn some things the hard way. And he wasn't going to be here for that part, and I think that... He paused. I think that was the hardest thing about it for him. She pressed her lips together. Once. Then she straightened, and she breathed. And she did the thing he'd watched her do all week, gathered herself without hiding. Thank you, she said. It was simple, and it was genuine, and it was the first thing she'd said to him across all these weeks that was entirely free of any performance at all. He would have figured it out, Silas said. Between the two of you, given time. She nodded. She turned back toward the boardroom where the legal counsel was waiting. Then she stopped, turned back one more time. Monday morning, she said. Can you be here at 8? There's a department head meeting. I'd like you to be introduced properly. I can be here at 8, he said. And Silas. A pause. The faintest trace of something wry in her voice that was the first suggestion he'd seen of a real, unguarded sense of humor. You don't have to drive me anymore. He considered it. I'll drive you Monday, he said. One last time. I know a good route. She looked at him for one long moment, and this time she did smile. Small and real, and nothing like the controlled expression of the CEO, something younger. Something that was probably actually underneath everything who she was. She went back into the boardroom. Silas rode the elevator down alone. The lobby was in its midday rhythm, quieter than morning purposeful, the ordinary and continuous life of a place where people came to do work that mattered. He crossed the marble floor, nodding to Darnell, who had clearly read something in Silas's face before Silas had said a word, because he sat up straighter and gave him a look that was the closest thing to a salute that a man sitting behind a security desk could offer. He pushed through the revolving doors. He stood on the sidewalk in the November air and called Elena. This time she picked up. She was on lunch break, she said, and from the background noise he could hear the cafeteria, the ordinary beautiful chaos of a high school lunch period. So, she said, how did it go? He thought about the boardroom, about the vote, about Martin Graves saying Warren used to do something like that, about Alexandra in the hallway asking whether her father had believed in her in the specific voice of someone who has needed to ask that question for a long time. It went right, he said. Yeah, he could hear her smiling. What does that mean? It means I have a real job again, he said. Starting Monday. A pause. Then, with the particular combination of sincerity and teenage understatement that was entirely Elena Dad, that's actually huge. Yeah, he said. It actually is. Are you okay? He stood on the sidewalk in downtown Chicago with the lake wind in his face and 40 years of his life behind him, and for the first time in longer than he wanted to calculate the specific feeling of standing at a beginning rather than an ending. Yeah, Elle, he said. I'm really okay. Good, she said. Can we celebrate with the good tacos tonight? Not the regular tacos. The good ones. He laughed. Really laughed from somewhere genuine. Yeah, he said. Tonight we get the good ones. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking toward the parking structure, his footsteps easy and unhurried on the sidewalk. He had a pickup to cover. He'd told the transportation company he'd finish out his current commitments through the end of the week, because that was what you did. And then he had a permission slip to sign and a dinner to have, and 6 pages of notes to turn into an actual plan and a company to help rebuild from the inside, which was going to take time and patience, and the particular kind of stubbornness that Elena had correctly identified as a family trait. He was walking past the corner where the coffee shop was Alexandra's coffee shop, the one she stopped at every morning when his phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it and saw above the message that it had been sent from Alexandra Hale's personal cell, a number that had apparently been added to his contacts at some point in the last hour by her assistant. The text said simply, "My father would have liked the way you handled this." He stopped walking. He read it twice. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, holding the phone, thinking about Warren, the real Warren, the one who knocked over coffee and laughed about it, and sat with engineers until midnight, because he genuinely loved what they were building, and he thought about what Warren would say right now if he were standing here. He thought Warren would say, "It's about time, Silas. Now go do the work." He typed back to Alexandra. "He would have liked watching you figure it out. Give it time." He sent it. He put the phone away. He had work to do. He went to do it. He drove her one last time on Monday morning. He was at the curb outside her building at 7:52, which was 8 minutes early, which was how he'd always operated. The doorman, a man named Carl, who had nodded at Silas every morning for 6 weeks without ever asking his name, held the lobby door as Alexandra came through it, and something in Carl's posture was different this morning, subtly, the way people adjust when they sense that the coordinates of a situation have shifted, even if no one has explained exactly how. Alexandra stopped at the car door for just a moment before she opened it. She looked at the Lincoln, then at Silas through the windshield, and there was something almost like amusement in her expression, the complicated kind carrying history in it. She got in. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He pulled away from the curb. "Madison to Michigan. No construction today." "Good," she said. And then after a brief pause that was nothing like the silences they'd shared before, "How are you feeling about this morning?" He thought about it genuinely before answering, because she'd asked genuinely. "Ready?" he said. "Are you nervous?" "A little," he said. "My daughter tells me that's a good sign." He could see in the mirror that Alexandra considered that and filed it somewhere. "She sounds like someone worth listening to," she said. "She's the best person I know," he said. "And I know some good people." They rode the rest of the way with the particular ease of two people who had arrived after a long and uneven journey at something that might become, with time and work and honesty, a real partnership. It didn't feel like resolution yet. It felt like the morning of the first day of a long project when everything is still open, and the difficulty ahead is real, but so is the possibility, and that combination is in its way the best feeling there is. He pulled up to the building at 8:02. He came around and opened her door. Not because protocol required it this last time, but because it seemed like the right punctuation on something. She got out and stood on the sidewalk and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for the driving, all of it." "It was good work," he said, and he meant it without irony because it had been. Every morning he'd been on time, every route he'd planned had gotten her where she was going, and he'd learned things from that car that he couldn't have learned any other way. "I'll see you upstairs." He parked the car. He rode the elevator. He walked through the lobby. Darnell, without looking up from his desk, said, "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," with such deliberate formality that Silas understood it was its own kind of ceremony, and he took the elevator to the 32nd floor, and when the doors opened, he walked toward the conference room where Alexandra was already standing with the 8 department heads who were about to meet for the first time with full understanding the other half of the company they'd been working inside of. She introduced him simply. "This is Silas Whitmore. He co-founded this company with my father in 2011. He holds 50% of the equity. He's been a board member for 3 years. Effective immediately, he's taking on an operational role, technical architecture, and systems integrity, with a seat at every strategy meeting going forward." She paused. "Anything this company builds, maintains, or sells runs on systems he designed. I should have had him at this table 2 years ago. He's at this table now. 8 faces, 8 separate processes of absorption, 8 different versions of the recalibration that Silas had been watching people perform for the past week." The head of sales, a sharp woman named Patricia, who had been with the company 7 years, looked at him with an expression of frank reassessment that he respected for its honesty. The head of operations, a younger man named Dev, who Silas had seen mentioned in internal memos as someone the engineering team deeply trusted, leaned forward slightly with the particular alertness of someone who recognizes that the morning just became more interesting than they expected. Silas said, "I want to be clear about what I'm here to do and what I'm not here to do. I'm not here to relitigate the past 3 years, or to second-guess decisions that were made in good faith with the information available. What I'm here to do is make sure that the technical foundation of this company is as strong as what we're building on top of it, and to help reconnect some things that I think have drifted apart." He paused. "I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to listen more than I talk, at least at first. And if I ever say something that doesn't make sense, I want you to tell me. The only way this works is if we're actually talking to each other." The room shifted, not dramatically, but the quality of attention in it changed in the way attention changes when people sense that they're in a conversation rather than a presentation. Dev said, "Can I ask something?" "Please," Silas said. "Tuesday morning, the system fix. Paulson said you did it in 47 minutes. He stopped, chose words. "He's been pretty quiet about the details, professionally quiet, but the engineering floor has been talking about nothing else for 4 days. What was it that the team missed?" So Silas explained it again. Not the compressed diplomatic version he'd given the board, the real version, the technical version, with enough specificity that the people in this room who had engineering literacy could actually follow it, and the ones who didn't would understand what kind of problem it had been and why it mattered. He talked for 8 minutes. The room was completely silent the entire time. At the end, Patricia said quietly, "We almost lost the hospital contract. And it wasn't a question." "Yes," Silas said. "And you knew that," she said. "And you came in and fixed it." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said with the finality of a woman who has made an assessment and reached a conclusion. "I have a lot of questions. Can we schedule time this week?" "Anytime," he said. The meeting ran 40 minutes over its scheduled end. Not because it was unfocused, it was actually one of the more focused department head meetings any of them could remember. Several said so afterward, but because once the room opened up into genuine conversation, it turned out there was a great deal that needed to be said, and that had been waiting to be said, and that came out now with the particular relief of things that have been held longer than they should have been. Silas listened to most of it. He asked questions. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, the same brand Warren had always used, a detail that did not go unnoticed by Alexandra, who glanced at the pad once and looked away with the composed expression of someone managing something private. Afterward, walking back toward his new office, a space being prepared on the 14th floor, close to the engineering team at his specific request, Dev fell into step beside him. "I want to say something," Dev said. "Go ahead." "I've been here 4 years, since before Ms. Hale took over. And there's been a feeling in the last couple of years that I couldn't quite name, like something the company was built on was getting harder to find." He paused. They were at the elevator now. "Tuesday morning, after you left the engineering floor, Keisha didn't leave her workstation for 2 hours. She went through everything you documented, every annotation, every note. I've never seen her that focused." He looked at Silas. "She came to me at lunch and she said, 'Dev, this is what the company is supposed to feel like.' She was talking about the way you explained the system, the care in it." He paused. "I just thought you should know that." Silas rode the elevator down to 14 in silence, holding that. He spent the rest of Monday in conversation. Paulson gave him the full engineering floor tour, not the corporate tour, the real one, workstation by workstation, system by system, the living organism of the technical operation that Silas had built the foundation of and had not been inside properly in years. He asked questions at each station. He remembered names. By the end of the afternoon, he had 3 pages of notes and 6 new commitments to follow up and a clearer picture of the company's technical landscape than any document had given him, because documents could tell you what was true and people could tell you what was real, and those were not always the same thing. At 4:30, Keisha stopped him in the hallway. She was carrying a tablet and had the slightly uncertain look of someone who has prepared something and is second-guessing the timing. "Mr. Whitmore, "Do you have 2 minutes?" "I have 5, he said. She turned the tablet toward him. She'd built a visualization of the legacy system architecture, a diagram mapping the relationship between every module color-coded by age and last update cycle, with the timing drift he'd identified marked in red across all the interfaces where similar variants might be accumulating. It was clear, and exactly the kind of documentation that would make the audit he'd recommended not just possible, but efficient. "I built this last night," she said. "Based on your notes. I thought it might help with the audit framework." He looked at it for a full 30 seconds. "This is excellent," he said. "This is genuinely excellent work." She straightened almost imperceptibly. "I want to understand the original system," she said. "All of it. Not just the sections that are still active, all of it. The decisions that were made in the original design, and why and what they were built to handle." "I'll teach you," he said. "No hesitation, no qualification. Starting Thursday if you want. 2 hours in the morning before the day gets complicated." Her expression was the expression of someone trying to maintain professional composure over something that had genuinely moved them. "Yes," she said. "I want." He went home at 6:15. He sat in evening traffic on the Kennedy and didn't mind it, which was new. Elena was already home when he got there. Something cooking on the stove, a homework assignment spread across the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in. "How was day 1?" she said. He set his jacket on the chair. He thought about Darnell saying good morning with that quiet ceremony, about Patricia saying okay with the finality of a decision made, about Dev and Keisha and Paulson and a room full of people who had needed for longer than they'd known how to say someone to walk in and remind them of what the foundation was made of. "It was a good day," he said. She smiled slow and warm, the smile that was entirely her own. "Good," she said. "There's enough for 2. They ate. They talked. He told her about Keisha's diagram, and Elena said without looking up from her plate, "She sounds like she's going to be important," with the certainty of a teenager who has inherited her father's instinct for seeing people clearly. He told her about the department head meeting, about Patricia and Dev, about the yellow legal pad that had made Alexandra look away. He told her about driving Alexandra one last time that morning, and about the doorman who'd held the door a little differently. Elena listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "Dad." "Yeah. You've been waiting a long time for this." He thought about that. About the years since Warren died. About board meetings and written concerns and quiet afternoons in a parked car reading 12-year-old architecture documents on his phone. About a marble lobby floor and a coffee-stained shoe and the particular patient discipline of a man who understood that the right moment is not the same as the first available moment. "Yeah," he said. "I have." Was it worth it? The waiting. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, 16 years old, long-limbed and serious, with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness and a quality that was entirely her own. A quality he didn't have a word for, except maybe wholeness. The sense of a person who was already at 16, substantially assembled, and he thought about what it meant that she was asking that question, that she understood it well enough to ask it. "Ask me in a year," he said. "But right now, yes. Yeah, I think it was." She nodded, satisfied, and reached for the hot sauce. The weeks that followed were the weeks of actual work, which are always less dramatic and more important than the weeks of revelation. Silas arrived every morning at 7:30 and left when the work was done, which was sometimes 6 and sometimes 8, and once on a night when a secondary system ran into a cascade issue that required real-time intervention, almost 11. He didn't keep score of his hours because he wasn't there for the hours. He was there for the outcome, which was a company that worked properly at every level, not just on the quarterly report, but in the hallways, in the way engineers talked to each other, in the way department heads stopped performing certainty they didn't have and started asking questions they'd been holding. He and Alexandra met every Tuesday at noon. Standing appointment, neither of them canceled it. The first few Tuesdays were formal agenda notes, clear division of authority. By the 5th Tuesday, they were talking differently. She would bring problems she was genuinely uncertain about and ask for his read, which she'd never asked anyone for in the 3 years she'd been CEO because asking had felt to her like a form of losing. He helped her understand that asking was a form of building. She was a fast learner once she decided to learn. She always had been. Warren had said so, and Warren had been right. She started slowing down in other ways too. Small ones, but real. She learned the name of the woman who cleaned the executive floor, Maria, who had been at the company for 11 years and had a son in nursing school. She stopped walking through the lobby, the way she walked through a checkpoint, and started walking through it, the way a person walks through a place where people work and matter. Darnell noticed before anyone mentioned it. He mentioned it to Silas in the particular way of a man who has been watching a building for 9 years and has learned to tell the difference between change that is performance and change that is real. "She said good morning to me yesterday," Darnell said, and she slowed down when she said it, looked at me. He paused. Like she had a second. "She did?" Silas said. "She's learning to have seconds." 3 weeks into November, the hospital consortium renewed the infrastructure management contract. Not for 7 years this time, for 10. The consortium's board chair, in a brief statement to the press, cited the company's demonstrated ability to identify and resolve complex system vulnerabilities with exceptional speed and expertise. The press release didn't name Silas. He didn't mind that. What he minded, and what he tracked with the same careful attention he gave to technical metrics, was the number on the Employee Stability Report for November, the first month since he'd taken the operational role, which showed the lowest voluntary departure rate the company had recorded in 2 years. 712 people went home that night to their families, to their routines, to the particular comfort of knowing their work was solid and their footing was sure. Silas knew that number. He held it. In December, he hired back 3 engineers who had left during the previous year's restructuring. He didn't make an announcement about it. He called each of them, personally explained the changes that had been made and the direction the company was heading, and offered them positions that were honest about what the work was and what it would require. All 3 said yes. One of them, a man named Robert, who had been with the company since 2015, said, "I never wanted to leave Silas. I just couldn't figure out how to stay." Silas told him, "I understand that. I had my own version of it. Come back and let's build it right." The photograph went up in Alexandra's office the second week of December. She didn't tell Silas she was going to do it. He noticed it the following Tuesday at noon, on the wall to the left of the window. Warren and Silas in mid-laugh, the coffee-stained floor out of frame, the specific joy of 2 people in the middle of building something they believed in. He stopped in front of it for a moment before sitting down. "My father looks happy," Alexandra said from her desk. "He was," Silas said. Right at that moment, he was very happy. "What were you laughing at?" "He knocked over an entire pot of coffee," Silas said. "Trying to make a toast. No champagne available, so he'd gone into the break room to find something, anything, and he came back with the coffee pot and was trying to pour it into paper cups while delivering a toast and—" He stopped, because the memory had arrived with full physical force. The specific sound of Warren's laughter, the mortified expression, the way the whole room had dissolved. "He had a great laugh," Silas said. "He did," she said, quietly without breaking. She had gotten better at that, at holding the grief without hiding it, without letting it flatten her either. It was a difficult balance, and she was still learning it. But she was learning it honestly, and that was the only way that worked. She looked at the photograph for another moment. "He was right about you," she said. "What do you mean?" "He used to say—" She paused. "In documents he left, notes. I didn't read all of them right away after he died. Some of them I wasn't ready for." She looked at Silas directly. "He wrote about you specifically, about the partnership. He wrote, 'Silas is the most patient man I have ever met, and patience is the rarest form of courage, because it requires believing in an outcome you cannot yet see.' She said it from memory, which meant she had read it more than once. "He was right," she said again. Silas looked at Warren's face in the photograph, mid-laugh completely himself, and felt the grief and the gratitude arrive together the way they always did when he let himself remember properly, not as an exercise, but as an act of love. "He was right about you too," Silas said. "He always said you'd figure it out. He just needed you to have enough time and enough—" He paused, choosing the word. "Enough friction," he said. He said some people only learn through friction. He said it like it was a compliment. He meant it as one. She looked at him. He was talking about himself, wasn't he? "Partly," Silas said. "You're more like him than you think. That's not always comfortable information, but it's true." She smiled at that, the real smile, the one that was still appearing more often, the one that had been there all along, underneath the speed and the performance and the armor that grief and responsibility had built around her. "All right," she said, and picked up the first item on the agenda. "Let's get to work." They got to work. The last week of December, Elena asked him what he wanted for Christmas. He told her he didn't need anything. She told him that wasn't what she asked. He thought about it genuinely, thought about it, which he didn't always do when people asked that question, and said, "Honestly, I want to go to Warren's grave. I go every year, but I haven't been yet this year. I'd like you to come with me if you want." She said yes, without hesitation. They went on the 23rd, a cold, bright morning, with the kind of clear sky that makes Chicago look like it was designed to be beautiful. They drove together in the Subaru. Elena brought flowers, not something Silas had asked for. She'd just stopped and bought them, orange and yellow. Warren's favorite colors that she somehow knew, because Silas had mentioned it once years ago, and she had remembered because she remembered everything that mattered. They stood at the grave for a while without talking. The cemetery was quiet, the particular stillness of a cold December morning when the ground is hard and the trees are bare and everything is exactly and only what it is. "Thank you," Silas said eventually. Not loudly, not performed. Just the simple direct address of a man speaking to someone who couldn't answer and whom he loved anyway, without condition, without the need for response. "For believing in me before I believed in myself. For the 50%, for your daughter." He paused. "She's going to be good at this, Warren. She's already getting there. Give her time." Elena put her hand through his arm. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with him, present and warm, and completely, solidly real. They drove home. They made dinner together, a real dinner, the kind that takes time. His mother's recipe for pot roast that he only made on occasions that deserved it. They ate at the kitchen table and talked about Elena's plans for the following year, about a class she wanted to take, about a book she'd read that had changed something in how she thought. Normal. Warm. The life that was the reason for everything else. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Silas sat in the living room in the quiet. He thought about the year, about a lobby and a coffee stain, and the way dignity works, how it is not granted by the people around you and cannot be taken by them either, how it is simply stubbornly, continuously the choice of the person carrying it. He thought about Keisha, who had come to their Thursday morning sessions for 6 weeks now, and whose understanding of the original system architecture was beginning to surpass what most engineers twice her experience could claim, and who was going to be exceptional, and who would carry something forward. He thought about Darnell, who said good morning every day and meant it. He thought about 712 people going home to their families. He thought about Warren laughing with coffee on the floor. He thought about Elena at 16, already more assembled than most people managed in a lifetime, standing at a graveside on a cold December morning, with orange and yellow flowers she'd thought to bring on her own. He thought about a Tuesday noon meeting that had stopped being formal and started being real. He thought about a photograph on a wall. He sat in the quiet of his living room for a long time, holding all of it, the weight and the lightness of it, the loss and the possibility of it, and what he felt was not triumph, which is a loud and temporary thing, but something much quieter and more durable. The feeling of a man who had taken the long road because it was the right road, who had waited because waiting was the honest thing, who had done the work without demanding that the work announce itself, and who had come through to the other side of it. Not unscathed, He was too honest to claim that, but intact. Fully, completely, stubbornly intact. He turned off the lamp. He went to bed. He set his alarm for 6:30. He had work to do in the morning. He had always had work to do in the morning. The difference was that now the work knew his name, and he knew its, and between a man and his purpose, that is everything.